I live in a village in the middle of an English countryside. To paint a picture of its actual size, it has a population of 4,000 but feels more like 1,000 due to its spread out nature and being surrounded on all sides by lots of fields, farms, and woods that eventually connects onto a pretty famous forest that's kinda in the middle of nowhere, and because of this has notoriously bad phone and internet connections. Having lived here all of my life, I know the place like the back of my hand. I know where all of the public footpaths through the woods and fields are, where they connect, which are shortcuts, which are closed deep streams, etc. I've gone on walks in this area throughout my childhood with my parents, and alone as an adult. Nothing bad has happened. I felt safe here. This story takes place last summer in July, after I moved back home from university, had yet to get a job, and smoked a lot of weed, a habit my parents despised and which I tried to keep hidden from them by going for evening walks, multiple pre-rolled joints hidden away in my hoodie pocket. As usual this day, they both got home at 5 p.m. We had dinner, but chatted for a while longer than usual as my mom had quite a hectic day and was telling me about it. Because of this, I ended up heading out for a walk an hour later than routine around 7 p.m. But as it was summer, the sun was still shining, so honestly I did not really notice that it would start getting dark while I was still out. The woodland closest to my house is less than 5 minutes away, and you enter through a gate into a farmer's field. You can see across the open area quite far until the first set of small woods obscures your view. That's where I was headed, as I knew this track takes under 2 hours and leads back onto the same path I was standing on now. More than enough time to smoke the 3 joints in my pocket, and for the smell to leave my clothing. I had thought, this entire area is very popular for dog walkers, so it's not unusual to see people while you are about. And as this is a village, everybody says hello to everybody. I lit my first joint and started walking. I'm just in my own world for a while until I was less than 100 feet before the entrance to the woods. An elderly man was coming out of them throwing a ball for his collie dog. I finished my joint and stumbled out. As I got closer, I recognized it was John, who lived on the road next to mine and knew my grandpa. We stopped and said hello as I stroked his dog Max. While talking, I see another man coming out of the woods. No dog, bright green jacket, very tall, and had a good 10 years on me age-wise. Me and John chat another minute and say goodbye. He warns me not to stay out here too long as it will start getting dark soon. True, the sky was bright pink and orange. The sun was indeed beginning to set. I hadn't noticed. I continued on down the path towards the man. When we were nearly passing each other, I look up to make brief eye contact, smile, and say hello like everyone does. Even if you don't recognize the person, my eyes instantly met his. He was already looking at me, his dark eyes locked on mine. He wasn't smiling. I did not know him at all, but I knew something was wrong. It was in his eyes. I swallowed my politeness and looked at the ground as we passed. I lived in my university's city the past couple of years, so I knew a red flag when I saw one, and my country bumpkin manners evaporated. I quickened my pace a little before entering the woods, slyly looked back. The man was still walking in the same direction. Following John, I felt relieved, laughed, and cursed the weed for making me paranoid while lighting up another joint and started walking into the woods. It takes about 30 minutes to follow the path through the woods to the end. The pathway exit opened into another field that led to another set of woods. The sky was now violet, the dimming light having been obscured to me by the trees. I was already smoking my last joint and was near the entrance to the second set of woods when I felt it. Fear, complete crippling, absolute fear, worked its way like electric through every layer of flesh. I'd never felt anything like it before or since, but I knew what it was. I whipped around. Standing at the exit of the first set of woods was the man. I could still make out his green jacket in the fading light. He's doubled back, and very quickly too. I looked back several times while in those trees, and he hadn't been there. For a second I froze, as did he. He knew I'd seen him. To sprint the distance between us would take another 5 minutes. He was obviously in good shape. I threw the spliff and bolted into the woods. The only way I could go. I did not dare look behind me. I sprinted for a couple of minutes before taking a sharp left turn off the path into the trees, hoping to throw him off a bit, but I could not see a thing. The light was already darkened, and the trees made it 100 times worse, especially as I was now in the thick of them. These branches catching on my clothes like fingers, whipping and scratching my bare legs so bad I bled. I ran and ran, my lungs protesting in pain, hating me for smoking so much, while my heart was throwing itself against my rib cage, trying to escape. I threw myself on the ground behind a partly thick trunk, my back against it, knees to my chest, head thrown over my mouth to stifle my labored breathing, desperately trying to bump air into my lungs for the next sprint. I listened for the first time. A few seconds pass slightly, then I hear him. Heavy footfall, snapping twigs behind me, and about 20 feet to the left. I dare not look in case he sees me. I have my phone, but now I have little chance of signal being where I am. And now he'd either hear me talking or see the light from the display. I'm not ashamed to say at this point I start to cry, the tears falling slightly down my cheeks. What the hell? I hear a deep voice exclaim, "Where are you? I know you are here. I saw you." I have to collapse both hands across my mouth to stop my scream escaping. I hear him moving around. I panic, and I find enough courage to slowly peek from behind the tree. He was about 10 feet behind me, less than 20 feet to the left, with his back to me. I move back and my eyes search the area around me. I pick up a pretty heavy rock. I carefully check on him again. His back is still turned, and he's searching through the trees, hunched down lower to the ground now. I make a snap decision, and with everything I had, I threw the rock behind me, to the right. It clattered through the branches of the trees and made one hell of a noise. I watched him immediately bolt in its direction, laughing. He laughed. I paused a little, hearing his footsteps get quieter, although I thought I would not be so visible to him if I moved, and threw myself forward. I ran, trying to put as much distance between us as possible, but I was also aware that I was getting further and further away from home. I knew there had been a stream somewhere close. If I found the stream, I could follow it as it borders the land and ran parallel to some of the footpaths. I ran and ran and ran until the trees finally cleared, and I could just make out another field through them to the other side. I thank God and push myself a little bit further till I'm out of the trees, and the ground disappears from below my feet, and I go head over shoulders down the stream embankment. I crash into the water below, my open mouth and lungs filling with muddy water. As I splutter it out, I feel both relieved to have found the stream and terrified he's heard me. My phone is now ruined. I slowly make my way downstream, as quiet as possible, listening out for him the whole time as the stream borders the woods, looking up periodically just in case. After a while, maybe half an hour, I notice the trees begin to thin out and realize this is the edge of the woods where I would have been exiting and where the path connected to the original one I'd started on. If I ran, I could get home in less than 20 minutes. As quiet as I could, I dragged myself on my stomach back up the embankment army style, wanting to stay as low as possible. A loud yell came from across the field. I swear my legs nearly gave out then and there. He had been waiting for me. I turned my head and saw him sprinting out of the woods at full pelt. I ran and ran, pushing myself up and over the gate, and ran up the road. I dared look as I made the turning for the road. He was still following me. I raced up my driveway and threw myself through the door, running into the living room, crying and screaming hysterically. Pointing behind me towards the door, my dad ran outside while my mom grabbed a hold of me as I collapsed shaking. As it turns out, my parents had already called the police. As I said, I was going out for an hour or so at 7, and it was now past 12 a.m., and I hadn't answered when they had called my now broken phone. Very unlike me. We called the police again to explain. They came, and I gave a full statement. Both my parents and the police were horrified. Nothing like this happens here. There hasn't been a reported rape or murder in the last 100 years. But one look at me and it was obvious I was telling the truth. I was covered head to toes in cuts and bruises, soaking wet and covered in mud and blood. I won't go into how this experience changed me. It's depressing. But I will say the thing that scares me the most is that they never even had a suspect despite him following me so closely. He was gone by the time my dad ran outside. The guy is still out there, and who knows what he is actually capable of. This story happened about 2 years ago while I was in university working on my degree in biology. I had signed up for a trip to gather samples for an experiment some students in the ecology department were doing to run. It required the collection of samples from several sites, so they recruited biology, ecology, and forestry majors to help them complete the sampling in a shorter period. The area my group was to take samples from was a few hours from my uni in the Pacific Northwest. We got to the campsite in the late evening and set up our tents. One of the other students had brought a big container of split pea soup from home and was sharing it with the others on the trip. I don't really care for split pea soup, so I declined the offer. Everyone had some except me. One other student and the professor come the next morning. The 5 students who had eaten the soup weren't in the best of shape. They were in the grips of some gnarly food poisoning and were in no shape to hike for 8 or 9 hours to collect samples we needed. The professor who was supervising us had originally some rules, such as people travel in groups of at least 2 and we had to return to camp by nightfall. Now those rules were tossed out to make sure we kept to our timetable and collected all of the required samples. We were just told to do your best to complete the work assigned as long as you can do it safely. That morning I set out for a long day of hiking. After a mile or so I ran into the stream I was supposed to follow. I needed to travel about 4 miles upstream, stopping every quarter mile to collect samples of the water and soil. This meant I had to hustle to get back before dark. Halfway through the day I realized that wasn't going to happen. About 2 miles into my hike I stopped for lunch sitting on a log overlooking the stream. The scene was really peaceful until I smelled the cigarettes. It wasn't the smell of a cigarette being smoked, more the musky smell of a heavy smoker's car where cigarette butts had been left to ferment for weeks on end. I looked around but could not see anyone. I just assumed that the wind had blown the scent of some hunter or hiker over to me. But minutes later the smell hadn't faded. The vegetation in the area wasn't that thick, but there was still a lot of places for someone to duck behind a tree bush. I was unnerved that someone was apparently staying close enough to me for me to smell them for this long without so much as a word. I quickly packed up the trash from my lunch and continued up the stream. The musty cigarette smell went away for the next few hours. It wasn't until I arrived at my last sample location late into dusk that I smelled it again. The woods were getting really dim by this point. Looking back on it, it was really a stupid idea to stay out so late, as just hiking back to camp in the dark would be pretty dangerous even without a cigarette-smoking stalker. Having just put the collection tubes in my bag, I shined my flashlight around the darkened woods looking for whoever was giving off the smell. I did not see anything that caught my attention. It would actually be more correct to say I saw too many things in the dim light that might have been a head sticking out from behind a tree or someone crouched low in the foliage. I didn't like the idea of being in the dark woods with a stranger who, for the second time, was lurking near me without revealing themselves, so I began to double time it back down the stream. I made much better time on my way back, even though it was dark, because I didn't have to stop to take any samples. Even so, I didn't get back to the camp till a bit before 10. I was the last one to get back, and everyone but the professor was already asleep. I didn't mention the cigarette smell to the professor because he seemed tired as it was, and he headed to bed in his RV soon after I got back. I headed to my tent soon after. At some point in the night, I woke up needing to pee. I decided to head into the woods to do my business, as I knew some of the other students were still feeling ill and needed the RV toilet for more urgent matters than just having to take a leak. I walked around 100 feet into the woods, found a tree, and did what I needed to. As I turned to go back to camp, something caught my eyes. Somewhere off in the woods, there was a tiny red glow. I was confused as to what it was until it flared momentarily, and I realized it was the cherry of a cigarette. I stood there for a while watching the red ember glow fade them and moved slightly closer to the ground, as whoever was smoking would take it out of their mouth. Not being able to see the person, I assumed they were watching the camp. I did not know if they had seen me make my way into the woods or not, as the fire had been doused and the moon was only half full, so there wasn't very much light. I made my way slowly back to the camp as quietly as I could and entered the RV to wake up the professor. I told him about the person smoking in the woods and about the smell of cigarettes earlier that day. However, when we got outside the RV, the ember from the cigarette was gone. My professor woke up the other students who hadn't come down with food poisoning, and we took turns watching over camp. I didn't see or smell anything else when I was on guard duty, and went to sleep when the professor woke up for his turn. In the morning, the professor and the other students and I went to where I guessed the smoker had been standing the night before, and sure enough, we found about 10 cigarette butts on the ground next to a tree. The tree itself looked like someone had been twisting or stabbing a knife into its bark, and outer layers of wood had been damaged and chipped away. The professor decided that the group should head back that day, even though we hadn't collected all of the samples we were assigned to. We packed up camp and drove down the thin dirt trail without incident. The second we got onto the paved highway, a white paneled van pulled out of a clearing just off the shoulder and began following us. This van stayed behind us all the way back, pulling off the highway when we did, taking the same surface streets that we did, and only stopped following us when we turned onto the road leading to our university campus. Everyone was freaked out by this, but it was around 9 at night on a weekend, so the security office on our campus was closed. We decided to unload the RV and call it a night, as the van hadn't followed us onto campus. I offered to help the professor catalog and store the collection tubes from our trip, so it was another couple hours before I left the biology sciences building and started heading towards the dorm building I lived in. I stepped out into the cool air and began walking, my professor having left the building in the other direction to get to his car and drive home. It was a couple dozen feet outside of the building, which was now locked, when I was hit with the musty smell of old cigarettes. I looked around, and about 25 yards away in the darkness of the footpath, I saw the cherry of a cigarette smoldering away. I was pretty scared at this point, but hoped it was only a student. I couldn't completely convince myself of this, as the musty cigarette smell was the same as what I smelled in the woods the previous night. I started down the footpath and soon passed whoever was smoking. 100 feet or so later, I looked over my shoulder and saw the cigarette cherry bobbing in the darkness. The smoker was following me. This creeped me out a bit more, but I still held it together. That until I rounded a small stand of trees and saw a white paneled van parked alone in a parking lot. I took off at a sprint toward my dorm building. I looked over my shoulder a few steps into my run and saw the cherry of the cigarette fall to the ground and the dark shape beginning to move after me. I didn't look back again. I could hear someone running in the grass off of the footpath. I got to the entrance of my dorm building and frantically waved my key card in front of the card reader that controlled the door lock. As soon as I hear the soft beep, I opened the door, jumped through the doorway, and shut the door quickly. I stopped and peered through the glass door. I saw the dark shape stop just short of the lit pathway. I just watched for a minute or two. Then I saw the spark of a lighter. The light is just barely bright enough to illuminate the shaggy beard and brim of a baseball cap before it disappears and was replaced with the red glow of a cigarette. I turned and headed up the stairs to my dorm room. By the time I get to my window overlooking I had just run through, there is no trace of a dark figure or a cigarette cherry. After that, I didn't see the white paneled van again, or smell that musty cigarette smell, and I hope I never do. Alright, if you enjoyed the video, go ahead, like, share, subscribe. Thank you for watching.